Studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there. A very good morning, everybody. What a time to be alive. This is Patrick Christie's filling in for Tom Harwood right here on GB News for the briefing. Should we get you briefed then? Right. Good morning, everybody. It is, of course, now 9:30, and this is indeed the briefing with me, Patrick Christie's, on your TV and radio and online. I will bring you all the very latest from Westminster, but first, it's your latest news.
Thank you, Patrick. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The UK will provide an extra £1 billion of military aid for Ukraine's fight against Russia. The 77% hike in funding will go towards boosting the country's capabilities, including its air defence systems. Boris Johnson says the UK weapons, equipment and training are transforming Ukraine's defences. But as the NATO summit draws to a close today, Labour's warning government cuts to troop numbers here in the UK are putting our NATO obligations at risk. Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey told GB News the UK's standing in the world is under threat as 10,000 service personnel will be cut from the British Army over the next 3 years. Passengers say Heathrow is total chaos this morning after the airport ordered the cancellation of 30 flights. Many didn't find out their journey had been scrapped until they arrived. Heathrow bosses say they're working with airlines to get those affected rebooked on alternative flights. A quarter of GP posts could be vacant in the next 10 years. The Health Foundation think tank has found that there's a current shortfall of over 4,000 full-time GPs and that this could rise to 10,700 by 2030. And taxpayer spending on the royal family has gone up by nearly £15 million. Accounts show public funding of the monarchy increased 17% in the last financial year, coming to a total of £102.4 million. A royal source says Prince Charles is extremely conscious of the impact of the cost of living crisis and is paying close attention to the matter. The Prince of Wales said he had a very emotional first meeting with his granddaughter Lilibet and his grandson Archie earlier this month. The meeting happened when the Duke and Duchess of Sussex briefly visited the UK from California for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick with the briefing.
Yes, a very good morning, everybody. It's just gone 9:30, 9:33 actually to be precise. This is, of course, the briefing with me, Patrick Christie's, on your TV and radio, just keeping Tom's seat warm for him. And what an honour it is to do that. He's off up to Grimsby, I believe. Somebody has to. Anyway, now, today marks the final day of the NATO summit in Madrid, with world leaders taking the decision to transform and strengthen our alliance at this pivotal time for our security. But there's loads of different elements to get stuck into when it comes to this, and we're going to do the absolute lot of it right across this show. And also hear from you, GB Views at gbnews.uk. We are, of course, the People's Channel, so we want to hear the people talking. But President Putin's war against Ukraine has shattered peace in Europe, creating the biggest security crisis on the continent since the Second World War. NATO has responded with strength and unity, with Finland and Sweden on the path to join them. And it's really fascinating, actually, when you look at some of the numbers when it comes to Finland and Sweden. They've had various things like national service for quite a while, so they've kind of got a ready-made fighting age group of people of about 1 million, which is pretty good, I think, and they're very well equipped. But anyway, leaders are also discussing how to balance the growing threat from military advances in China and, of course, new cyber warfare capabilities. Well, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in Madrid for the final day of this summit, and he brought us this report.
Well, it's the final day of the NATO summit here in Madrid. We're expecting to hear from the Prime Minister a little bit later on, probably trying to spell out the details of that announcement that was made overnight about an extra 1,000 troops that are going to be deployed to NATO's eastern flank, and an extra £1 billion as well, in addition to, actually, frankly, more than £2 billion that's already been contributed to the effort in the war in Ukraine in recent months. It's clearly quite a sizable contribution. The UK, along with NATO allies, Germany, the United States and others, insisting that they do have Ukraine's back in this war. I think, as Emmanuel Macron, the French president, put it quite recently, that this is a war that Ukraine needs to win. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, suggesting that there was a clad iron guarantee that they would have NATO's backing whatever the costs. And that is why we're seeing these announcements in the recent days about extra supplies of weapons, communication systems and fuel to try and help out the Ukrainians. Frankly, though, the Ukrainians, as always, perhaps unsurprisingly, want to see NATO go further. But in the end, it is also a reminder, in many regards, about the restraints and the constraints on Britain's contribution. And the reason I say that is because many people feel that actually, given the cuts we've seen to the defence forces in recent years, and I say many people, I include the Chief of the General Staff in all of this, that they think it is not necessarily terribly sustainable to carry on cutting the defence forces, particularly the army, in the years to come, while trying to up our contribution to NATO. And so what we've seen this week is a real big debate, actually, within government, in which the Ministry of Defence, the Foreign Office, have essentially been campaigning for an increase in defence spending at a time of a cost of living crisis, and Downing Street and the Treasury not necessarily being wholly on board with all of this. And it is a really, really crucial debate about whether Britain can afford, frankly, at this time in which there's, calls for tax cuts, in which the cost of living is going up, whether we can contribute more to NATO, whether we can increase defence spending. And I expect it is going to be a debate that rages within government in the weeks and months to come, as those calls for greater defence spending only grow.
Yeah, thank you for that, Darren, who's been keeping us well and truly briefed from Madrid throughout this NATO summit. But joining me now is Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, former commander of the UK and NATO's chemical, biological and nuclear forces. Thank you very, very much for joining me. It's difficult to know where to get started, really, when it comes to this particular summit. One of the things that I'm really keen to think about is about the kind of conjoining of potential weapons and what could actually realistically be done. So from what you're hearing at the minute, you're very plugged into all of this. What kind of agreement do you think is properly going to be reached? And what does that look like in practice in terms of weapons and defence for the people of Ukraine?
Well, as you say, Patrick, it's a very complex issue. The number one thing is we must make sure that Ukraine prevails in this conflict. We've seen all the war crimes being committed. We've seen the civilian casualties, and we've seen the brutality of the Russian forces. Not least, you're talking about the cost of living crisis. Let's not forget that that is mostly fueled by the conflict in Ukraine. And as soon as we get the conflict sorted out, then, we can get inflation down and we can get everybody, back to work.
And is that the driving factor? Sorry to interrupt, but do you think that's going to be the driving factor for a lot of these nations? Because initially, I think we were a little bit of an outlier, maybe us in the US, in providing, shall I say, more practical help for the people of Ukraine than, 5,000 to 10,000 helmets initially that the Germans did, for example. And do you think now Europe has got together and realised, actually, financially, we're in a mess until this is sorted out? And is that the key driving factor behind, essentially, a weapons deal?
Well, I hope not, Patrick. I hope it's the moral factor. It is our moral responsibility to protect all those people in Ukraine. And let's not forget, Putin claims that he is the new Peter the Great. Peter the Great conquered Europe, and many think that that is really in the back of Putin's mind. But actually, for the person in the street to really understand why they're having to pay so much for their fuel, it is because of the aggression of Russia. So that in order for that to happen, we must enable the Ukraine military with our support. And although the British military is very small, as you've said, and General Patrick Sanders has asked for increases and also to change the way we're configured, that is absolutely essential. Quite frankly, if we don't prevail, if we don't have a decent military, everything else is of secondary issue. And one of the things that we are brilliant at in this country is our armed forces. The men and women of our armed forces, pound for pound, are better than anybody else. And the Ukrainian government, who I've been helping, are very aware of this and very appreciative. So we can do an awful lot, and we have done in training. Now it's to make sure that that training and that equipment gets to where it's needed so that the Ukraine can prevail, hold the Russians, push them back, and get them to the negotiation table.
Yeah, send the Russians packing, hopefully. But this is the thing that I'm concerned about, is that we've drained quite a sizable number of our resources already by providing the Ukrainians with much-needed and justified support, but that actually now we haven't got enough for ourselves.
Well, I'm not sure that's entirely the case, Patrick. You're right that we have given them an awful lot of equipment and we've done a lot of training. But it's better that way than putting British boots on the ground in Ukraine, which is really the alternative. When it comes to the security of this country, I think you've got a really good point there. And hopefully that is taken on board by the Prime Minister and others. But also, lest we forget, it is our nuclear deterrent capability that at the moment is preventing Putin stretching for that. So I think on a whole host of ways, not just the military, but the security services, we are still secure in this country. But the absolute key to our security is enabling Ukraine to prevail, holding the Russians and pushing them back whence they came.
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought Dominic Raab actually made a fantastic point yesterday at the Dispatch box, actually, which was quite a strange interaction, really, between him and Angela Rayner. It was all a little bit matey, a bit winky, certainly in his case. It was almost like it was more theatre than anything of massive substance. But Raab, I thought, made a good point, which is that Jeremy Corbyn, and we can't forget this about the guy who, well, not nearly became leader because Boris did send him packing, but certainly stood for it and gave it a good crack. He would have taken us out of NATO, wouldn't he? Wouldn't have had a nuclear deterrent. Just quickly, sorry about this. It's a bit of a swerve. This. I'm going to ask you about Finland and Sweden because I think a lot of people feel as though almost like NATO would be doing them a favour by them joining, but actually, I think it might be the other way round, Mike. And see, I've heard some numbers here, and you will know better than myself, but of something like a million boots that they could possibly put on the ground, for example. They're relatively well equipped. I mean, they'd be a good addition, wouldn't they?
Patrick, absolutely. The Swedes and the Finns have fantastic men and women in their military and fantastic equipment. They tip the balance. Putin never thought that they would join NATO, never thought Ukraine would be on its way to the EU. And back to your point, the Stop the War coalition and Jeremy Corbyn, not only would they have us out of NATO, they would have got rid of our nuclear capability. Yeah. And Putin would have been able to march across Europe, to our very doorstep.
Exactly. It's a terrifying thought, isn't it? But I'm sure, I've got no doubt that someone like you would stand up to him as Colonel Hamish de Bretton-Gordon there. Thank you very, very much. Much appreciated insight and knowledge into what's the biggest issue in the world right now, ladies and gentlemen, what's going on in Ukraine and specifically how NATO react to it. That was former commander of the UK and NATO's, of course, chemical, biological and nuclear forces, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Right, we're moving away from that right now because the collapse of the Iran nuclear deal could lead to military escalation. Gosh, it's kicking off worldwide, isn't it? And further turmoil in the global energy market. So proponents of the deal said that it would help prevent a revival of Iran's nuclear weapons programme in return for more resources and, of course, exchange for billions worth of sanctions in terms of relief. Well, EU Representative Josep Borrell is on his way to the Iranian capital, Tehran, to salvage the Iran nuclear deal, or at least try to, bringing the nation closer to the US. But as it stands, the US and Iran are unlikely to reach an agreement. In fact, let's be honest, they've not really reached many agreements in the course of history, have they? But with Iran believed to have expanded its nuclear activities far beyond the limits of that 2015 agreement. But joining me now is Shiva Mahbobi, a spokeswoman for Campaign for Free Political Prisoners in Iran. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there an argument to say that, yes, all right, whilst it might be nice to do some kind of deal with the Iranians and shore up world peace, actually they're so awful, as I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the government, obviously, they're so awful that it's impossible?
Well, it is impossible. As you know, it has been 20 years since the first negotiation with the Islamic regime in Iran. We need to put this in a context. This is a dictatorship that in Iran, they use imprisonment, they use torture and execution to suppress people in Iran. And just give you an example to make it more real, like, for example, if people on the street, they come and question the regime that why the price of bread is high, they will be basically tortured and imprisoned. Outside of Iran, it's impossible because they also, outside of Iran, they're creating terrorist groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and supporting terrorist groups in other countries. So this is a dictatorship that uses forces to get their demands. So therefore, the nuclear basically deal, it's just a way that, go on.
So, sorry, just quickly, it's just that you know this show, we're very, very pressed for time, but it's an important question, this, I think, and I want to get your view on it. If Iran really did kick on with a nuclear weapons program, would the entire world be at risk?
It will be, but my point is, that's what I explained, that the entire world isn't obviously at risk. With the nuclear program, with the nuclear weapon, of course, we have a more kind of dangerous Islamic regime, of course, no doubt about it. But at the same time, if we just limit the danger of the Islamic regime to nuclear weapon, that would be wrong, because they are already operating their terrorist act inside and outside of Iran. So what I'm trying to say, when they take hostage taking, when they imprison people, when they do terrorism act outside, so the danger is not nuclear program. But remember also, there is a difference between North Korea and Iran. In Iran, there is a huge protest against them, and the regime will be overthrown. So therefore, I think instead of 20 years wasting this government wasting their time on nuclear deal and negotiation, meaningless negotiation, they better be on the side of people in Iran and to overthrow the Islamic regime. That's the time that you would say there is no danger.
So the solution here is revolution.
Well, the solution, people are in on. You would be amazed that every single day they protest against the regime. So for a regime which is very weak inside the Iran, one thing that is needed is not this meaningless, pointless 20 years negotiation. It's actually for this government, including British government, who has right now 2 British citizens in the jail in Iran, to isolate the Islamic regime, to actually put a condition of releasing this dual national before any negotiation. This negotiation might go longer. It doesn't matter. The fact is that even if the Islamic regime, see, one of the things that the Islamic regime uses is they want to get the the Revolutionary Guard off the terrorists. This is what they're pushing for. And that's why last time the negotiation basically failed. But that's not the point. It makes me angry when all the power, all the government, they put their pressure. They're talking about the nuclear deal. This is not the matter. The Islamic regime just uses it. Since 2006, following the first nuclear deal, actually the number of dual nationals who got arrested increased. So that shows that even if they reach nuclear deal, we still have a dangerous Islamic regime. So the only way is to boycott it politically and isolate it internationally. That's the way we get rid of the nuclear deal and the regime.
All right, good stuff. OK, all right, look, thank you very, very much. It was great to speak to you, great to meet you, actually. I'll have to have you back on one of the shows that I do, because, look, let's be honest, this issue isn't going away, and I can tell you're very passionate about it as well. Of course you are, so good stuff. Shiva Mahbobi, a spokeswoman for Campaign to Free Political Prisoners in Iran. Now, the restoration and renewal of the Palace of Westminster has been under discussion now for many, many years as the building continues to battle various hazards. I mean, you can't move for scaffolding outside there, can you? The House has reaffirmed its commitment to preserving the palace for future generations and ensuring the safety of all of those who work there and who visit, OK? Well, Tom Harwood might not be presenting this morning. In fact, he's on his way to Grimsby at the minute. So watch out, people of Grimsby, by the way, because Harwood's about. Anyway, but there we go. But we couldn't resist bringing him back onto your screens anyway. We can never have enough of Tom Harwood, can you? Anyway, he caught up with Dame Meg Hillier, Labour MP for Hackney South and Shoreditch and chair of the powerful Commons Public Accounts Committee. Take it away, Tom.
Now, Meg Hillier, you chair the influential Public Accounts Committee. It's a committee that has quite a lot of influence over how government is run. It's something that ministers really do respect. What is the general purview of this important committee?
Well, we look at how taxpayers' money is spent by government, because we remind them constantly it's not their money, it's other people. It's not other people's money, it's the money of taxpayers who work hard to fund all of the public services that we use. So we look at the economy, the efficiency and the effectiveness of how government spends that money. And unfortunately, we find too often that quite a lot of it is wasted. So we produce quite a lot of reports highlighting our concerns, and government has to listen to those and respond to us. So yeah, everything we say they have to respond to, and we follow up if we're not happy.
Really interesting looking at the number of reports that you produce. Currently 40 inquiries taking place within your committee. Why so much that's going on over a team of relatively few number of MPs?
Well, we're very well supported by something called the National Audit Office, which is basically the public audit body of the UK, who have access to every public body's spending and accounts, and they look through that, and they will, at our behest, sometimes at their own behest, look at some projects that we're concerned about. Sometimes other MPs or others recommend that, and so if someone's got a concern, they will look at it, give us the numbers and the detail, and then we call in the senior civil servants, not the ministers in our committee's case, responsible, the ones who are responsible for watching how that money is spent and making sure they deliver what they say they're going to deliver. So it's a fascinating committee, but it means that twice a week we're looking at two separate subjects. We do work at pace, so it's not for the faint-hearted.
Now, one of those reports that you're producing, one of those investigations you're undertaking, is into the restoration and renewal of the Palace of Westminster. This seems to be a saga that has been running on for a very long time, and indeed many decisions seem to be made and then unmade. It seems to be all very murky. How is that report getting on?
Well, we've published the report because we've been, in fact, under an Act of Parliament, as part of our job is to look at the amount of money being spent by taxpayers on the beautiful building behind me. So it's a challenge because it's a World Heritage Site, it's listed, it's also the home of our working democracy, so it's important to get it right, and it's never going to be cheap, because look at it, it's a very beautiful building, lots needs to be done, but there are huge problems, and as you highlight, there's a lot that's been delayed and put off and decisions reversed. This latest saga began in 2016 when two committees of the House of Commons decided that there needed to be work done to it, and they recommended that we all move out while that work is done. That's those who work here, MPs included. That then took a while, but in 2018 a vote was taken in the House of Commons agreeing with that process and setting up the body that would then make sure that the money was spent sensibly on delivering on the work that needed to be done. And now we're seeing a reversal of some of that. So it's been very concerning. What our concern is as a committee, the top line is lack of transparency. The tax-paying public and everybody else who's got an interest in this building needs to know what decisions are being made and why. And instead we're seeing a lot behind closed doors, which is pretty shocking for the home of democracy.
And it's a really big concern, or it should be, for taxpayers, because the difference between MPs staying in and the work going around them, it's not just a difference in the work taking a much longer time, but also costing a lot more money. I remember that debate back in 2018 where it seemed to be won on the cost effectiveness. MPs, lords, staff moving out for a period of time will save the taxpayer billions. Why does that seem to be being unpicked now?
Well, I think it's a terrible worry that some people have, that if you unveil to the British public a big number, they will say that's a waste of money. But if you hide it over many years, and we're spending a couple of £1 million a week, let me repeat that, a couple of £1 million a week on the building already, before these major works have started, that somehow the British public won't notice that. Well, you know, the taxpayer, the citizen are not fools, right? They can see this. And if you refurbished your house and you could afford to move out and do it in one hit, it's quicker. Very much the same here. And actually, COVID has shown that we don't need to be physically present to do our job. So, you know, getting out, doing it in one hit is quicker. Cheaper is perhaps, cheap's not quite the word, but it's more cost effective, as you say. And then we can come back and use our beautiful building for the Parliament that it was designed for.
The numbers you're talking about are extraordinary, just to keep the building ticking over, just to prevent a Notre Dame-style catastrophe, as happens in these old buildings that sometimes aren't properly maintained or looked after, costing so much every single day simply to keep it running. Eventually this is going to come to a head.
Well, that's it. But it's been going on for 40 years, and for a group of people who want to run the country, because that's we all get elected and want to be in government to change things, it seems a remarkable lack of decision-making in the House of Commons. Again, this fear about that money. It's not going to be cheap, but it cost over £140 million just to put in the safeguards to stop people dying if there was a fire. That doesn't save the building, let me be clear. So they're all over the place as fire security measures, but there's several fires happen every year. Masonry's falling off. Only a few weeks ago, another bit of Parliament was inaccessible because they had to cordon it off because a bit of masonry had fallen down. So it's only a matter of time before there's an accident. And the longer we delay, the worse it gets. And we're here in 2022, and a report from 2016 still hasn't been implemented. It is pretty shocking.
Now, lots of people who can look at the building will be seeing the vast expanse of scaffolding behind you. Will be seeing that the building's known as Normanshaw North has been closed because it's being refurbished. We'll have seen, indeed, the refurbishment of Elizabeth Tower, of the tower that holds Big Ben. Now, all of these projects are going on, but none of them are the big renewal and restoration projects that you're talking about.
That's right. Because behind the scenes, the bits that you don't see, and I've had the opportunity to tour the basement, you see all the mechanical and engineering activity that goes on, the things that have to keep a building the size of the Palace of Westminster running. A lot of that is hidden between the floors of committee rooms, quite dangerously. There's a lot of asbestos there. And to actually get that mechanical and engineering working was going to cost a lot of money. It needs to be ripped out, and it's impossible to work in that environment. There'll be noisy, there'll be asbestos released, and so on. So it's got a lot of work has to be done to also make sure that the integrity of the building is monitored, because there's a lot of stonework that's flaking away, damp that's getting into the building. These are all real problems. And when the work starts, I wouldn't want to be there, nor do I want any staff to be there or any visitors to be there when asbestos is being ripped out, because that's just not safe. And already before Christmas there was an asbestos leak, which means that over 100 people are now being monitored for 40 years because of that, which is what happens when asbestos is released. But let me be really clear, you can't do this on the cheap. And if we really value the beautiful building, it's a World Heritage Site, so we have to do something with it, and you really value it as the seat of British democracy, then it's going to have to be done. The other alternative, well, there is no alternative. It either falls down, burns down, or we do something about it. Even if Parliament wasn't based here, you have to preserve the building.
Well, Meg Hillier, it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I look forward to, indeed, parliamentarians responding to the work that you and your committee have been doing. Let's hope the building can be saved.
Thank you.
Fascinating stuff. Right, coming up, it's To The Point with me and Mercy Muroki, but first, it's your weather.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Showers again for many of us today. Some lively downpours in places, interspersed by brighter interludes. It's the same pattern we've seen over the last few days. It will continue over the next few days. Low pressure to the northwest, and around that low, unstable air, the air bubbling up all the time, producing showers and, in some places, longer spells of rain. For example, eastern Scotland first thing, some more prolonged rain. Eastern parts of Northern Ireland as well. Risk of localised flooding here because of the wet weather this morning. But across the rest of the UK, it's a mix of sunny spells and scattered showers. Winds are light, so the showers will be slow moving. That means if you're unlucky and get caught in a few showers, they could last some time, with some hail and thunder in the south. But equally, the sunnier spells will last for a bit longer. So where we get some sunshine, the potential for 22 Celsius eastern England, more likely 18, 19, 20 degrees for much of the rest of the UK. Showers continue for a time into the evening and overnight, before eventually longer clear spells across the UK, and with light winds, clear spells, cool air in place. Temperatures dipping 11 to 13 Celsius in the main urban areas, but single figures in sheltered spots. A bright start nevertheless tomorrow, plenty of sunshine first thing. Still some showers around coasts initially, as well as inland as the temperatures rise through the morning. And again, the showers will be heavy and slow moving in places. By the end of the afternoon, the focus will be towards the eastern part of the UK, with drier and brighter weather towards the west, but temperatures once again a little below average for the time of year. Saturday sees further showers, particularly towards northern parts of the UK. Sunday, some signs of improvements, drier and sunnier weather, and that trend continues into next week.